Charge up the flux capacitor and jump in the DeLorean. Ryan Adams is taking us back to the 80s on his latest album. My review of Big Colors is coming up next on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so you won't miss future reviews and more. The date was January 7th, 2019. Ryan Adams took to Twitter with an announcement that seemed like a dream come true for his fans. In the tweet, he wrote, "Remember that year when I released 3 records? Let's do it again." The year he was referring to was 2005, and the 3 albums were Cold Roses, Jacksonville City Nights, and 29. With that January 7th tweet, Adams began the promotional cycle for that year's new trilogy, set to kick off with Big Colors, followed by Wednesdays, and then a third album that was at that time untitled. Fast forward to June of 2021. After a long delay, Big Colors has finally been released, now the second album of a trilogy, swapping positions with Wednesdays, the apologetically melancholy album Adams surprise released back in December. Although some listeners weren't ready or willing to welcome Ryan Adams back, I thought the album set an appropriately and occasionally painfully earnest tone. It ended up landing in my top 10 albums of the year, in fact. Of course, the trend with trilogies tends to be that the second chapters are usually the best. So if Wednesdays was Adams' A New Hope, could Big Colors be his Empire Strikes Back? Well, that's maybe not the best comparison, but I know Ryan is a big Star Wars fan, so I thought he might appreciate the reference. Maybe, though, we should be looking back at that 2005 trilogy of albums as a better point of reference. The first chapter album, Cold Roses, was not only the best of the 3, but also one of the best of Adams' career. Jacksonville City Nights saw him returning to his country roots in Chapter 2 for an album that ultimately never clicked for me. He closed that trilogy with the very melancholy 29, a solid effort, but not one I return to often. From a tone perspective, this new trilogy started out feeling like 2005 in reverse. Wednesdays often had a similar feeling to 29, though I thought the newer album was a far better effort. And while Big Colors doesn't exactly see Adams going country again, in fact, very far from it, it is still a very different album from Chapter 1. Adams has made it clear in the run-up to this release that he's taking inspiration from the music of the 80s this time. Here's how he describes the album. Big Colors is the soundtrack to a movie from 1984 that exists only in my soul. It's a cliche inside a watercolor painting of neon blue smoke rising up off summer streets in the night. It's the most New York, California album I could cut loose from my musical soul, and for me as both a guitar player and songwriter, this is the zenith point dream time. While I won't be able to match this album for its depth and broad color forms in the future, this is the sound of my soul and a door to a place I'll be returning to again. He concludes the message saying, "The treasures in our past are the shamanic visions of the future when the destination is Dream Zone 3000. This is that. I'm only dreaming in big colors now." So does that description fit the actual album? Sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo to me, if I'm being honest, but we are talking about an album with a cat on the cover after all, so, we're probably better off letting the music do the talking. Let's dig into it, track by track. The album opens with the title track, a choice I find to be a bit peculiar because nothing about the song beyond it being the title track feels like it should be in that position. Big Colors, the song, is a pretty mellow affair, and while it does feel well rooted in the 80s vibe that permeates most of the rest of the album, I still get the sensation starting here that I skipped over a song or two. When I reviewed the song as a single previously, I commented on how it sounded more like a Demolition-era B-side. I will say that it does play better within the context of the whole album, but only marginally so. It seems weird to say I'd like the song better if it was deeper in the track list, but it's true. Come to think of it, I think Do Not Disturb, the second track on the album, might have been a better choice as an opener. It's actually one of my favorite songs on the album, and one that I think best sets the tone for everything to follow. I really love the way the chugging bass takes the melodic lead laid over a dark and thin synth bed. There's an ominous sense of foreboding to the track that I really dig. And then the chorus drops with the piano and acoustic guitar strums, and everything just elevates. This is the first of many moments on the album where I get a strong Smiths vibe, actually. It's a feeling that continues on the next song, It's So Quiet, It's Loud. Just listen to the jangle of the guitar in the song, a dead ringer for Johnny Marr's sound. Even Adams' longing vocal style here is reminiscent of Morrissey. Then, late in the track, when the beat drops, the lush strings come in, and the guitar plays a counter melody, everything becomes immaculate. Even the false ending is great. Definitely an album highlight. It's hard to believe it's been over 2 years since Fuck the Rain was released as what was intended to be the first single from this album. I wasn't wild about it at the time, but perhaps absence makes the heart grow fonder. The song has a bit of a classic Ryan Adams feeling to it, if such a thing exists. Think Ashes and Fire or Easy Tiger, maybe. In terms of the 80s vibe on the rest of the album, this song is an outlier, but not in a way that feels totally out of place. Still, what really makes this track work is the guest players that show up in the second half. John Mayer's weeping guitar accents, laid over an organ bed played by former Heartbreaker Benmont Tench, is just what the song needed. But I feel like it comes too late and is over too soon. In fact, there's a trend on this album for just that kind of late track left turn wake-up call. It happens again on Manchester, a song that is chugging along in an enjoyable but kind of unremarkable way when this sonic twist occurs around the bridge, and I'm like, whoa, that was pretty cool. Without the bridge and the dramatic ending with the strings and falsetto vocal, Manchester is a song that teeters on being album filler. There's some great instrumentation going on throughout the song, including more Johnny Marr-style guitar, but I wish the song had a bit more staying power. It feels like it utterly disappears as soon as it ends. Closing out the first half of the album is What Am I?, one of Ryan Adams' trademark intimately melancholy self-examination songs. It's a track that could have fit into the moody song cycle from Wednesdays, but it actually feels a bit less personal than those songs did, less autobiographical. It's a fine song, but that's about it. If anything, I love how it sets up the 180-degree turn we take on the next track. Power delivers exactly that. Here, Adams channels a gritty, almost rockabilly persona. I love the way the crunchy guitars sound all awash in reverb and the driving percussion pumping along like a freight train. Structurally, Power is essentially 12-bar blues, but the up-tempo staccato of the rhythm guitar makes it feel like something much more than that. I could totally have heard Robert Plant tearing it up on a song like this back in the mid-80s. This is another album highlight for me. Sticking with that more electric sound on track 8, Adams delivers another great 80s style rocker with I Surrender. This is a track that calls to mind another Adams from that inspirational decade, and that's Bryan Adams. I could totally have heard him recording a song like this back in the day. Not that this sound is new for Ryan Adams. I Surrender could have easily fit within the song cycle on his rock and roll album. I like this track a lot for the elements Adams is playing with, but it ultimately lacks any real structure. It's like he had a few really good ideas that fit together well, but he couldn't figure out what more to do with them. At just over 2.5 minutes, this is the shortest song on the album. Maybe that's a good thing if he couldn't figure out anywhere else to go with it. Next up on Showtime, we get another early 2000s style Ryan Adams mid-tempo jangler. It's a pleasant enough track, but maybe a bit too reminiscent of other songs from that era by acts like Howie Day, Goo Goo Dolls, or even Matchbox 20. It feels a little too formulaic for my taste. And that's about it. Hard to call it a low point, but, Adams stays in a similar mode for In It for the Pleasure, but at least here the style feels more native to his own aesthetic. The song is strongly reminiscent of Desire from the Demolition album 20 years ago. The biggest problem with that is that Desire was a much better song. This is a trap I've heard some of my favorite artists fall into, and it never works out well for me as a listener. Regardless, the song is fairly lacking melodically, even if it does have one or two compelling lyrical turns. We're back in 80s mode again on Middle of the Line, and it is certainly a welcome return. Here, Adams channels The Replacements for a great feel-good pop rocker that shapes up to be the kind of summertime song he references in the lyrics. There's a lot to like here, but there's also a few things that feel like they fall frustratingly short. Musically, the verse and chorus are terrific, but the pre-chorus feels a little too lightweight as a transition. Lightweight is also how I describe the vocal on this track as well. Adams never seems to match the attitude and bravado of the music here, and he occasionally feels swallowed up by the guitars. Still a great song though, and I'd love to hear Paul Westerberg sing it. Just saying. The album closes with Summer Rain, another perfectly 80s rocker in the style of acts like Paul Young, Corey Hart, and, yes, Bryan Adams as well. At this point, it's earnestly clear that Ryan Adams can expertly mimic that sound and era, and if you grew up on that kind of music, there's a comfort food quality about it. But like several other songs on this album, Summer Rain doesn't have much staying power. It's an album closer that sounds like the closing credits song from some forgotten 80s melodramatic movie starring someone like Andrew McCarthy trying to pull off angsty intensity for 90 minutes. You wouldn't remember the movie, and you probably won't remember the song. You know, going into this album and hearing the singles, I wondered if the songs would play better within the full song cycle than they did on their own. I'm not so sure that actually happened. If anything, when you prop up some of these songs together, they start to take on a feeling of sameness that threatens to turn the album into sonic wallpaper. Even when Adams perfectly nails the 80s vibe, the songs too often lack the hook or melody that made the music that inspired him so memorable. By the time we get to Summer Rain, for example, you can't help but feel like you've heard this song before, and not in the 80s, but just a few tracks before. There's still some true standout tracks in the song cycle, though, most of which are the ones that veer away from the 80s vibe. Power and I Surrender are a couple of good examples of that. And I did enjoy the more alt-80s feeling when Adams channels acts like the Smiths on It's So Quiet It's Loud, or the Replacements on Middle of the Line. It's also worth noting that the track list for this album is not the same as what was originally announced back in January of 2019. At that time, Big Colors was to be a 15-track album rather than the 12 tracks it became. All 12 of these songs were on the original track list, though slightly shuffled around. But 2 tracks ended up shifting to the Wednesdays album. Specifically, I'm Sorry and I Love You as that album's opener, and Dreaming You Backwards for the album's closer. Missing in action is Doylestown Girl, originally a track 5 on Big Colors, and a song that was even previewed back in 2019. Odds are it now ends up on the 3rd album of this trilogy, titled Chris, for Adams' late brother, who died in 2017. In any case, it would be interesting to hear the songs in their originally intended order to see if Big Colors might have been a better album in the form it was originally intended. In this form, though, the colors in Adams' box simply aren't as bold as he seems to think they are. So, I'm giving Big Colors by Ryan Adams an X rating of 6 out of 10. It's a generally satisfying, retro-flavored experience that occasionally elevates to or above its points of inspiration. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, plus check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.